Thank you, Travis. I found this slide as I was preparing one of my classes earlier this year. It's one view of a 2014 map of world freedom. And to make Brian Grimm's point from this morning, I thought you could change the title and make it Map of Freedom of Conscience 2014, and the map would be the same. And you could change it again and make it Map of Economic Development, and the map would say the same. Now, I'm not suggesting that there is an exact correlation between those things, but that is part of the message of this conference. Freedom of conscience, freedom of religion is part of that freedom. I'm drawn to the US idea, or the idea of the US framers, that freedom of conscience comes first. That logically you cannot have freedom of speech unless you can first have freedom of thought and conscience, and you can't associate freely unless you can think and speak before you do that. But freedom and expression are not binary concepts. They're not an on-off switch. They are part of a continuum. We may affirm speech, freedom of speech, and yet suppress other parts of freedom that make up this compound whole, which is freedom as a whole. But I'm not convinced that complete separation of church and state is ideal or necessary for optimum freedom in every single country. We heard discussion about Fiji today. I've been there many times. I've been there right before and right after some of the coups. And I'm sympathetic to, despite the fact that he was very unpopular with Australia and New Zealand political leaders after his coup, I'm sympathetic to Mr. Bainimarama's view that, like Locke, if we allow one religion, Methodism in this case, to rule the roost, it will suppress all the others. And we can't trust it. There have been 3 attempts, and so perhaps there is a place for a secular state to get us onto an even keel. I'm not saying that should apply in every single country. I was interested in Katrina Lantos-Sweat's comment this morning, and we all know little about each other's countries, to suggest that perhaps Australia could respond and implement a RFRA, a Restoration of Religious Freedom Act of Australia, and that might help us. But I thought Tim Wilson was right on the button when he said, and he explained politically why that just wouldn't work here. I understand when I say what follows that it is impossible for the Australian version of establishment with almost identical words would not work in the US. And yet the fact that our justices, back in that Defence of Government Schools case in 1981, said establishment does not mean purging all religion out of the marketplace, out of the public square. It only stops the establishment of a state religion. Now, if you could take that back into the US, there would be a place for prayers in schools without the restrictions. But that can't happen, not the way it's gone. And I have wondered, and I haven't teased this fully out of my mind yet, but that John Rawls was a product of the American Establishment Clause paradigm. That is, he grew up in an era and in a judiciary where it was accepted because of the principle of judicial review that you can strike down as a judge what your democratically elected representatives have decided. We in Australia have never ascribed to that view. We have a little piece of it creeping in with the European doctrine of proportionality. But we still would, our High Court, I think every one of the justices individually would find it very difficult to assert the proposition that they could strike down, as Vaughan Walker did, Justice Vaughan Walker did in Perry versus Schwarzenegger, the democratic decision of the state of California on their same-sex marriage proposal, because it could only be justified on a religious basis. So there are cross-pollinizations that could occur. We only have about 3 words different in our section 116 of our Constitution from the US First Amendment. I just want to leave those ideas there. I want to return, though, to that thought to make Brian Grimm's point. You could change that caption and it explains all 3 subjects, and that is a profound insight. Thank you, Brian.